Greetings and welcome to the Department of Tangents podcast, a conversation with musician Corin Ashley with new comedy from Fern Brady. I'm Nick Zano, your host, and we've got a lot to get to, so I'll keep the intro short. Corin Ashley has a new album out called Broken Biscuits, a collection of hook-laden power pop featuring Ashley's impressive voice and bass chops. But halfway through recording the album, all of that was taken away from him when Ashley had a stroke. There was a moment when he wasn't sure if he'd ever come back, but he has. He finished the new album, and he's playing out again and singing again. So we discussed the new album, of course, and also Ashley was very open with the details of his stroke, both what happened and how he recovered. We compared notes a bit since I have MS and went through a period where I didn't know if I'd play music again either. So if you have someone who's gone through a stroke or other neurological problems, or if you are someone who has gone through neurological problems, this might be something you want to listen to. I had a technical glitch that killed some of the audio toward the end of the conversation, so this is a two-parter. We talk about Ashley's musical history leading up to the stroke in the first part, including his early days with the Pills and taking songwriting cues from XTC at a time when rock music fans were captivated by grunge, and Ashley's blossoming as a solo artist. And Ashley gives a harrowing account of the onset of the stroke. I caught up with him by phone to expand on his recovery, and unfortunately in between the two interviews, the world lost a rock and roll giant in Tom Petty, so we spoke a bit about Petty's legacy as a songwriter and as a performer. And after the conversation, stay tuned for a track from Fern Brady's new album, Female Comedian. And now, Corin Ashley. So I wanted to start with the Pills. And
you have any?
I have quite a few.
All right.
None that I think will do anything happy. I don't see anybody strung out on metformin anywhere. But so you and David Thompson met in line.
Yeah.
If getting tickets for the Replacements opening up for Elvis Costello. That was what?
Right at the at Mass Ave and Boyle Street, the Tower Records that used to be there.
Or
Newbury Street.
And that was 95?
Oh, somewhere in there, yeah. We met, actually, I think it might have been 93 when we met. We knew each other for quite a while before we actually got together and started a band. We were both in different bands, and I tried to lure him into to my band at the time, and we used to play with his band, and I just kind of had a connection with him early on. And then it was kind of interesting. Both of our bands were petering out, and at the same time, we both saw the Figs for the first time. And then I saw Velvet Crush and made Dave go see Velvet Crush. And we were like, we should make a band that sounds just like these two bands combined. And that was the totality of the blueprint. Mm-hmm. It's like real fast, short songs and like those wailing guitar solos, you know? Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's how we met.
So when I looked at the bio online, it talked about how the band was sort of a reaction to grunge, and you didn't want to be that. But I can't imagine it being sort of that. Like, how does that manifest itself? You don't just sit down and say, let's not be grunge.
Well, we're not to get too technical, but where there would be sort of like in a Pearl Jam song, there'd be big ringing power chords that are open. Mm-hmm. We would play things much more staccato and like kind of the guitars would go back and forth, and very influenced by XTC in a way, where the guitars would be like across the. They would interact, and they were very rarely like full on C blang the full chord. It would just be two notes versus two notes on the other guitar player, and that's how we would tend to lay out the harmonies. Mm-hmm. So, and then the vast majority of the songs in the Pills repertoire, especially early on, were sung in two-part harmony throughout, with like a third part coming on the chorus. So that was kind of our thing that we settled on early on, and all the songs were like a minute and a half long. So that was always like we would always come out and be able to do like 5 or 6 really short, fast, hooky songs in a row before anybody had a chance to even decide if they wanted to clap or anything like that. So
well, how much can that even be premeditated, though? I mean, you can say we want to have two-part harmony in every song, but you come up on something and said, well, maybe you need to sing this or I need to sing this.
It just we just really, I don't know, very early on we just hit on the fact that we really loved to sing together, and a lot of our lyrics were like sort of rapid fire, so it was very kind of to see it like two guys like da 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 like in thirds flowing, was kind of interesting, and we got a good response to it pretty early on. We did like a little 3-song cassette at Zippa in Brighton, that studio. And it was one song that was like 3 minutes long. It was, whoa, that's our epic. And then 2 like 2-minute songs that were short and fast and that harmony. And then we just gave them out to everybody. And everybody really reacted to that thing you're doing with the 2 voices and the short. That's good, So we just really concentrated on that. And we wrote other kinds of songs as well. But we kind of, as a rule, always had a bunch of those on each album, and my other rules, I always had songs with girls' names in the title because I had the idea that then people with girls with that name would at least like listen to that song,
It's a marketing thing.
Door in the door, foot in the door.
Then you
throughout the Pills records, we always had girls' name songs, which so did Material Issue. So I'm not the only one with that thought.
How did you pick the names? Did you write songs backwards from the names?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Like you just come up with the name and kind of stick it in there,
But do the names dictate what the song would sound like, or is it just a name? I have this idea.
Yeah, like Dave had one called Molly and Me. And I don't think there was a real Molly. It's just like he just had this vision of a Molly and Me carved into a tree, and that rhymes, and he was off to the races, So, and I had one, something about Nicola, which was just totally made up. Didn't know anybody named Nicola, but then I met people named Nicola afterwards, so that's it's nice,
Did people see this as sort of a relief from what was more popular at the moment?
We were definitely relieved from popularity, I can assure you. We didn't trouble anybody with mass popularity. You were safe with us.
But in terms of the sound, did people?
Well, I think with anything, there's a natural reaction to whatever's going on with popular music, and it seems like around 93, 94, things are getting very rock, and we liked some of that too. Like we were really big fans of the Posies and their second record, which is very rocking guitars, like a lot of like detuned guitars, and we liked that. We liked heavy stuff a lot, but it's really, we really clearly, we early on, we kind of settled into an aesthetic, which I was always of the opinion, like, this is great. Let's really define what we do, and then people will either reject it or like it, but at least they'll know what we are. It won't be just like one of a million other bands. And, they're always like, we don't have these long kind of mission statement arguments about like, well, if that's all we are, then we're like, crossing off a whole section of the potential audience. And meanwhile, we just have these big philosophical discussions about that sort of thing. But I think we were able to make, one thing about that band was we were able to make a really quick impact when we would play new towns. We used to tour a lot and play, and there were a lot of places where we went, and there were 20 people with their arms crossed at the bar, and within like 5 songs you'd be like, yeah, and then we'd sell some CDs. So we did have a thing that worked,
I know some of the best albums or songs are albums where the sound sort of meanders. It's not.
Yeah.
The band doesn't have just one sound. Or they
definitely from a fan point of view, I tend to like albums that take on more of a journey, but this was more like I think one of the albums that Dave and I in particular really had in common was Singles Going Steady by the Buzzcocks, which is a compilation. But it was the only Buzzcocks album we had, so we thought, this is a great album. All these 2-minute songs are just really super hooky, and we didn't realize there were also album tracks that didn't get put on that,
I wonder,
for us.
How in control you can be of how you sound. I guess you can. There are people, like David Bowie, Neil Young, that change their sound frequently, and then there are some people who just sort of sound like what they sound like, and if they try to deviate from that path, they sort of destroy something that whatever gave them the sort of magic.
Well, you might have hit upon something in that I could be guilty of trying sort of preconceived notions about what I should do musically, like what kind of thing I want to do. And for instance, in the Pills, as ridiculous as it sounds, even though Dave and I are both huge Beatles fans, we kind of steered clear of anything too Beatley because to us that was like so obvious that's where we were coming from, you know. And the band was like two singers who sang together, then a guitar player who sang on the chorus. And it was a 4-piece band, 2 guitars, bass, and drums. And we would tend to like steer away from things that were obviously Beatley because it would be too obvious, you know. And when the band broke up, then that was where the real moment when I was just like, oh, I'm just gonna do what I really want to do, you know. So that's sort of like I think my solo albums, I kind of unleashed that Beatley thing that I've been holding back for a long time. It is the primary like musical passion of my life, and I've been kind of holding it at odds within my own music. Although, you know, certainly it snuck in there at every opportunity, you know.
Well, if it's part of the building blocks of how you learn to play and sing and write,
I mean,
it's going to be there somewhere.
Yeah. It is the building blocks, essentially, you know. But I would tend to go, like, rather than be like, say, like, well, we're going to do something kind of Beatley, be like more, like, well, let's do this a little bit like Squeeze or Crowded House, which are, you know, Beatles derivatives, you know.
So after the band breaks up and before you record your first solo album, what's going on with you musically?
Well, we had kind of reached that, which I think happens to a lot of bands. We've been together a little over 9 years. And we had all the potential in the world and toured around and did opening act slots for, you know, just all sorts of interesting people. We did all the things a rock band can do, except sort of take it to the next level, you know. And, you know, there was a thing around the 6th year where we were like, well, what are we going to do? We're going to move to New York? We're going to move to LA? What are we going to do to make this to take this to the next level? This definite feeling of like, okay, we've gotten really big in Boston and we tour all over New England and we've gone to Spain and we've done a tour of England and we go to Canada regularly. But what are we going to do to actually take it to the next level? And as it became kind of clear that, you know, people were starting to get married and settle into more adult lives, we weren't all going to like go live in a house on the beach in Santa Monica and solve mysteries on the way to gigs together, you know.
And that was the model. That was
absolutely,
just like the Beatles used to do.
It's just there's a couple of years where it was like, oh, is this thing petering out? What's going to happen, you know? And then eventually what happened was that it was not even a crisis of any sort of like, you know, we're breaking up. It was just that Dave, his wife is a really successful dermatologist and she got an opportunity to join a practice in Seattle, which is where she's from. And it would be like a huge idiotic mistake for them not to go. It was a really, really rare opportunity. And for them to like build a life in Seattle, and like of course this is his friend, of course like I want you to go do that, succeed, be happy. But then my partner was gone, and I really as time has gone on, I think both of us have really realized the value of finding that person that you can sing harmony with so effortlessly, and we always knew what to do on each other's songs instantly. Sometimes to his chagrin, I would know what to do on his songs instantly. And he would be like, I got it, I wrote this already, it doesn't need to be rewritten, you know. But I think that it was one of those things where we had spent so much time together in that 10 years. And really, I mean, I think 10 years is the lifespan of a band. And then you've either got to like, something big's got to happen, or you're just going to start doing the same thing over and over again.
I feel like that's a tough thing because I feel like it's natural to get to a point where you're probably at your best, and then you have to decide whether you want to do it anymore.
Yeah.
And I think that probably wrecks a lot of really great bands, or a lot of also a lot of great comedians, or a lot of anybody in the arts.
Yeah, you get that 10,000 hours in, and then you're like, I'm sick of this. You know?
Yeah. Well, it's either you're sick of it, or you're not getting to the next level.
Yeah.
So then there's that choice. Do I stop? How do I keep this in my life? Something that's sort of sustained me for years and years. So you're going forward as a solo person at that point. As a solo, were you reluctant to do that? Were you thinking maybe I'll join another band? What?
You know, I would have joined another band, but nobody ever asked me. You know, putting that out there. I thought kind of like, well, I'm a pretty good bass player and I can sing, and I thought somebody will come along and be like, hey, you know, here, you know, and it just never happened, you know. I never got together with anybody else or anything like that, and maybe it's because I'm a songwriter. But what happened was, you know, just, being so influenced by the Beatles, naturally what I did was I bought an 8-track recorder and started recording some stuff in my house,
Uh-huh.
And then I ended up going out to my friend Roger from the Curtain Society, which is a great band out of Worcester.
Mm-hmm.
And he had a barn studio out in like East Boylston, Mass. So I took this big Otari 1/2-inch 8-track, weighs like 200 pounds, like, I can barely carry it. Took it out to his barn and recorded stuff out there, and then brought it back. And which is, you're not supposed to do with tape machines because they get out of alignment. I didn't know. I just moved it around in my hatchback,
Uh-huh.
and filled the 8 tracks. And then I would do like a little mix down to 2 tracks. I put that on 2 tracks and keep going. And then I took him to Ducky Carlisle, who mixes a lot of my stuff. I would just take the tapes to him, transfer them to Pro Tools, and he would line them up and mix them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I did the first album. And there were 2 drummers there were 3 drummers in the Pills, actually. There was one, our friend John, who was there for like the first 8 months, and then Jamie, who came in, who was a much younger guy, very powerful. And then Jamie was the one who wanted us all to move to California. He was like, we have to do this. This is a great band. We can do this, And really, I think it's mostly because of I was a little bit older than him, a little bit more insecure and not sure. Like, I had friends who were musicians in LA, and I said to one friend, like, he came to see our band, and we played out there at the Troubadour. And I was like, we're thinking about moving out here. And he goes, well, he's like, you'll be great, but like your band will break up because everybody else will join other bands, Uh-huh. Other bands will see you and they're like, I'm taking that drummer, and you want to do a tour? Do you want to do that, So I was afraid of that, and who knows if that was a mistake? I'm not sure,
Uh-huh.
But anyway, so Jamie moved out to LA finally. Eventually, he was like, well, I'm going without you. And he installed this guy named Matt, who still plays drums with me to this day. And he was this crazy, just insane person. Jamie was just like, he just said, I'm leaving. I'm not quitting the band. I'm just moving to Los Angeles. That's the way he did. Like, how's that going to work? He goes, well, my friend Matt's going to cover for me, permanently. And that's really the way he left it, Like, well, what if we don't like this guy? He's like, trust me, he's a loon. And he is absolutely insane. And the one thing, like, once the Pills broke up, I was like, well, I'm taking Matt with me. He'd stay with me. I get custody of Matt,
It's sort of an Uncle Tupelo situation, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I was just like, he's coming with me. He's just an hysterical human being who always says the wrong thing at the right moment,
So once you get to that first album, the sound, the first album seems like more of a tribute to singer-songwriters. That's it's right there in the name. It's and then after that, the sound starts to expand a lot more. Was that was that because you're more comfortable in the studio, or because you're more comfortable as a writer, sort of
that's
accumulating?
where I might not be totally in control of. I might be just writing what I write, but I am definitely a product of my musical enthusiasm. I get excited about music a lot, and then when I hear something that I really like, I'll tend to be like, oh, I want to do something like that, without hopefully that being completely obvious. But I think the first album, I was listening to Neil Finn's solo stuff a lot, and a lot of Neil Young. And I thought, well, I'll kind of keep it between the 2 Neils, and there'll be this little Beatley thing there. And also, I'd gotten this really nice finally I got a Hofner violin bass. A really nice one, and I had black tape wound strings on it. And as silly as it sounds, I think that greatly influenced the sound of the album, because it drove a lot of the songs,
Do you write on bass?
No, I write on guitar. It's funny because I'm really a bass player. That's primarily what I am, and a singer, and that's my true love. But I actually make a living playing guitar. It's kind of weird because there are a lot of really worthy guitar players in Boston. But my day job is I own an agency that books bands through weddings and corporate events, and I lead one of our big soul bands. And a lot of times I'm the guy who has to kind of go deal with whatever, the event planner. And if the bass drops out, it's no good. But the guitar, you can put it down and go do that, and fine. But I think on that album, the first one I was definitely... well, there are a couple of things that really influenced. One is, first of all, Mike Castellano is a pedal steel player in the area, and he played pedal steel on a couple of different tracks. And I specifically said to him, like, no country cliches. I want it to be like, I want you to play pedal steel like it's an instrument that doesn't have a history, So there's no reverb on the pedal steel. She was just like, oh, you gotta. I mean, you gotta. And I'm like, we're gonna do without it, And I think that really we were putting through some pedals and things like that, and I think that really made a big impact on the sound. And The other thing about the first album is that as different people have played with me, I usually have Matt play with me when I do band shows, and then my guitar player is usually Corey from Pills, has kind of gotten back into playing a lot after having kids and being out of playing. He's kind of into playing, so he's doing it. And then the keyboard player, Salat, is kind of a rotating cast. And what I always find is when they have to learn the songs from the first album, I have to point out they're not at 440 because I was messing with the vari speed the whole time. You know, everything's changed. I mean, I was really into slowing things down and speeding them up for different sounds, you know. Now, the second album, the primary thing that started it really, the thing that really just kind of jump-started the whole thing was that I was about to turn 40. And I was driving with my wife, and she was like, you know, 40 is a big age. What are you going to do? And I was like, oh, I don't know, you know. We're just driving. And I said, this is crazy, but what if we could book recording time at Abbey Road? Like, wouldn't that be the most amazing thing? And she started laughing really hard. And she said, you know, you should call your friend Martin and talk to him about that because I think he knows about that. And I was like, yeah, he worked there. And my friend Martin was in a band that recorded at Abbey Road, so I called him in England. I was like, I'm just driving. I'm thinking that for my 40th birthday, what if we could like book some time at Abbey Road? And he started laughing. He's like, you're so obvious. We've already made contact with him. That's like, of course, that's what you'd want to do. He's like, of course, Darcy knew that. You know, this is not a surprise that you would think of that. You know?
Right. Well, it's we went to London a couple of years back, and it's you can't really tour.
No,
because it's an active studio.
Yeah.
Everything's full. People are recording, so you can't really pop in and see those rooms.
It was funny. I booked he booked it for me, and then when we went over there to do it, the day before the session, I called the reception. I said, you know, I've been to Abbey Road a couple of times and had a good stare from outside, but how do you get in? And the lady's like, you just walk in. And I was like, really? She said, yeah. I was like, people don't just walk in all day. She's like, no, it's a business. You can't do that. But you're booked here. You're allowed to walk in. So we did, you know. But I was very surprised you could actually just go in like a normal business and sign in and go do your thing. But
there wasn't like a secret passage or something.
Although there's a little to the side, to the left of it, there's an alleyway, which is where you load your gear into Studio 2. And, you know, I just kept thinking, like, oh, man, this is like Mal Evans and Neil Aspinall probably carried the Beatles amps a million times down this alley, you know. But that was the main thing. I just got one day in Studio 2, and my friend Martin kind of assembled a band for me, which was a beautiful gift because he's from Liverpool, and he got his drummers from Liverpool, and then he got this guy Ed Ball, who was in the band TV Personalities in the Times, and I'm kind of a big fan of his. And Martin's always amused that I hold Ed in such high esteem. I always think he's like this mystical character. He's like, it's just Ed, you know. He got Ed to come play piano, and he got his friend Charlie to because it's so expensive, and it was like going to be like another $800 for an engineer. It's like, well, I don't know what you know. They give you they give you a couple of assistants, but if you want a proper like Abbey Road engineer, it's crazy expensive. So
the guys in the white lab coats.
Yeah, and you want the guys in the white. You want them to wear the lab coat, you know.
The guys who are literally scientists who say you say I want this sound, and they figure out what the waveform is and work back.
So Martin had this friend he was working on an album with at the time named Charlie Francis, and he talked to him, and Charlie said, well. He said, Charlie says he'll do it for free, like, because he just wants to work at Abbey Road. And I was like, okay. And, like, I was literally with him on, like, I have no idea, but beggars can't be choosers. I'm sure it'll be fine. Turns out this guy, Charlie, is, like, he had just come off working on an R.E.M. album. And he's done a lot of stuff with Robin Hitchcock. And he's a really, like, world-class engineer. So I totally lucked out. And then as we were signing into the guest book, I noticed the name above us was Ken Stringfellow from the Posies. I was like, oh, Ken. And Charlie's like, oh, strings, I know strings way back, you know. And we went up and found he was mastering a record, and we said, oh, come on down, you know. And he came down, he ended up singing on it, which was great, you know.
Was there a feeling in the studio? Was there
a
vibe you could actually? Yeah.
Well, I think it would have been very easy to be intimidated by the whole experience, but it is frightfully expensive, and you very quickly go like, well, let's get something done. And we got 3 songs. We got basically the 3 songs tracked. But the really funny thing is that my son Harrison was 3 at the time, and he was just, you know, like Martin had all these effects pedals he brought, and Harrison was just down on the floor of Abbey Road, and we were trying to record things, and the engineers going like, "There's a sound. We can't figure out what the sound is." And it was Harrison making like race cars out of Martin's pedals on the floor, like, "All right, son," you know. But it was pretty cool. I mean, you know, my wife took Harrison. They went to a museum then so we could record. And they came back at the end of the day, and we had 3 songs kind of recorded, and they brought in like a fruit platter for us. And Harrison just chomping on the apples and eating all this fruit. And then they wanted to go back to the hotel, and I was like, "Oh, I'll get a taxi or whatever." And the assistant said, "Oh, we can have the reception can call you a car." I was like, "Oh, thank you."
What was the feeling when you stepped into an isolation booth there for the first time? What was it?
We didn't do anything in isolation booths there. They have big screens that they use because the ceiling is 40 feet high.
Right.
So they just have big screens that they put up to block off different sections of the room. And they have, they had to have a copy of the Beatles recording book in the control room. So it was like a catalog. You could literally go through and go like, "Okay, we'll have this drum set up. This is the Ticket to Ride setup, and we'll have that." And then they put the drums exactly where Ringo's drums were, and use the exact mics,
Mm-hmm.
And the room sounds amazing. And that was the thing that I think what we did that was right about that was that somehow I managed to just capture the things that sounded a lot like this particular room while we were there. Like we got the drum sound of that room, and we got the piano. It's the same piano that was used on like Hey Bulldog. So that piano is on my recording.
You would think that those things are long gone from there.
No, they've got like some. It's weird because they don't have any amps at Abbey Road. They have no guitar amps.
Mm.
They don't have a drum set. You have to rent those.
Mm.
Just bring those in. It's very weird. They don't have like any guitars. There are no guitars at Abbey Road.
No.
It's kind of weird, right?
Yeah, it's weird, but I could see, considering who's trucking in and out of there, mostly that they're going to want their own setups. Maybe it's just a practical thing.
It's very odd. Then again, you find out you have to rent everything.
Yeah, but then again, I wouldn't expect Ringo's kit.
No.
To be lying around there. But were there butterflies when you stepped in there?
Yeah.
I'd imagine there would have
weird.
to be, but was it positive?
It just also felt just like finally getting to some place I wanted to be my whole life. I mean, I've seen pictures of that place since I was a kid.
Yeah, I remember one of my first big interviews was with George Carlin. I remember I was living with two other people at the time, and I had to do it on a speakerphone upstairs in my room, and basically saying, "Please, I'm really sorry. Please don't come anywhere near my room in the next hour." And that feeling that I had a big old clunky tape recorder sitting next to the speakerphone, and that's how I recorded the interview. I'm thinking, man, George Carlin's voice is coming out of my phone. Like for those, I had all my questions written down, and those first two or three, I'm just sort of, waiting for him to finish his sentence so I can ask the next question. A bit of autopilot. I imagine stepping into Abbey Road would be a similar sort of.
The odd thing was that from looking at pictures for so long, I kind of knew where everything was. I knew the layout of it already. You go down. I knew like you go down the stairs and then over here and. Here's where they used to smoke weed, so George Martin couldn't see them, and stuff like that. And we managed to get a lot done, and then we had enough time that I started cutting some lead vocals, and they put up a couple of those Neumann U48s that they were the Beatles mics, And I was, this is so cool, and I was starting to like getting some tones, and the one little the Abbey Road guys. Probably like a major engineer now, because they have a great system there. But he was saying, with the serial number, if you like, we could actually tell you which Beatles songs that mic was used on. And I was like, to be fair, let me sing this first, and then don't tell me this is like the Lucy in the Sky mic or anything like that until after I'm done, And then we ran out of time, and you never did. But can you imagine the intimidation of that,
Yeah, of knowing this is what. Well, I mean, just knowing that's a microphone that Lennon and McCartney gathered around, possibly the both of them, singing into, or
And it's funny too because of course when you do lead vocals, you can always do 1,000 takes, and you can get very precious about it. And I was like, my throat's kind of a little bit. And my friend said, well, you just have to, if you can't get it this time, you just have to do it next time you're booked at Abbey Road, or you can just do it now. So, of course, you're like, I'm going to sing this now. I'm going to sing this song now. And you just did it in like 3 or 4 takes, and it was great.
Well, the other side of that is, I know what the stakes are. I know this is where music can go. This is what I'm shooting for. So I'd assume it might also inspire you to lift your game, sort of, to use a trite phrase, but
I kind of I don't know if other people kind of caught this, but I acknowledged the situation a little bit in that the song that I'd already written, but kind of like reconfigured for this session. It was called Badfinger Bridge, as if to say, like, believe me, I don't think just because I'm renting Abbey Road for one day I'm the Beatles or anything like that, you know. So I was like going shooting for Badfinger, you know. And then it was really funny because I was supposed to rent a Hofner bass, you know. Go to Abbey Road, rent a Hofner bass, and when I showed up, they didn't have the Hofner bass. There's something wrong with it. They said, but we have this Monkeys bass. I was like, that's perfect.
Oh, like the Gretsch
monkey? Yeah, it was the Gretsch Monkeys bass, and I was like, that's just perfect. Actually,
they had something similar at Q Division.
Yeah,
it's like something that's
giant,
barely carved out of a tree. Like they didn't leave a lot on the ground after that one.
So I think that was Scott Riebling's bass, and it was there for a while. The neck on that thing is like, you know, a Louisville Slugger.
I played it when I recorded at Moon Tower in the back. So I played it. That's somewhere on my album. That and the little K bass.
Oh, the K bass is great. That's Ed's.
I love that bass. I'm not even a bass player, but I didn't want to. It's it's sort of technical jargony thing for people listening, but it's sort of like a similar bass to a Hofner, and it had I think like rubber wound strings or something on it, and I just didn't. It was in my hands for half the time I was in there recording because I just wanted to. It just felt so nice. And
I think a lot of times with bass, my personal thing is that having a more limited sound frequency wise that has its own space in a mix can make a huge difference. A lot of people with bass, they'll tend to have, you know, really bright round wound strings and like a lot of fundamental tone, a lot of sub bass and all these different frequencies, and you're like just covering up the vocals and the guitars. They're all competing in the mix for the same space, you know. So I think like deep foundational bass is where it's at.
You know? Yeah, well, that McCartney plunk.
Yeah.
That finds its own space sonically. Is that something that attracted you early on?
Yeah.
Was that maybe the reason why you have such a taste for English rock music?
I have to be, you know, through the evolution of, you know, when you're first a kid and you get handed a bass, you know, like a lot of people, I was in a band, we could never find a bass player, and one day I showed up at rehearsal and they were like, "You're the bass player," and they handed me a bass, you know. Somebody's dad had bought a P bass, and I was like, "I'm the bass player." And you don't know anything about strings or gear or tone knobs or anything, you know. As I got a little bit better at bass, obviously McCartney was always a big thing for me as a songwriter, and definitely his bass playing was in there. But Chris Squire was kind of like my man when I was like a teenager.
From Yes.
Yeah. And he always used that bright, distorted tone, so that was kind of like, I tended to go for like a much more of an attack and a brighter sound. But over time, I eventually got back to less of the. I just remember at one point, just on a whim, putting some flat wound strings on my bass, and all of a sudden it was like I was home. You know, just felt like really this is the way to be. You know.
So let's go forward to 2015, and
Okay.
that's when you started recording Broken Biscuits, correct? So are you building on the sound of New Lion Terraces at that point? Well, what are your thoughts as you're putting that together?
Well, New Lion Terraces, the other thing about that album that I would mention is that I was really listening to a lot of English folk music at the same time as kind of heavier things. So like Al Stewart has an album called Orange that I was in love with at that time, and I got really into like doing some weird tuning stuff. A lot of strange tunings on guitar, on acoustic on that album. So that was a big part of that thing. And then as I got to the new album, I kind of wanted to do something maybe a little bit more straightforward. I got a lot of really positive response to New Lion Terraces, and I kind of thought I have a lot of people who really like the last album who will probably like give a listen to whatever I put out next, and I want to give them something really. I in a way, wanted to get more like straight ahead power poppy on some of the things. Now the way it ended up is different, but like it started off with Little Crumbles, which is the first song on the album. And I was like, that was like my mission statement: write a song that within the first 30 seconds you're either in or you're out. You're either like, yes, this rocks, I totally dig this. This sounds like Rock Show by Wings, and I'm totally gonna see this through. Or you're like, this is played old. You know, this is just rubbish. I'm not into it. So I really wanted to like, a lot of, I've always struggled back and forth about whether I want to be a power pop guy, because to me that's like, a label like that is like you putting blinders on what you can do, and I think there's a lot more to what I can bring to the table. I don't want it to be just like, as much as I love Badfinger and the Raspberries and Big Star and Cheap Trick, I don't want to just copy them, I want to bring my own thing to it, But I got a really nice response from sort of the power pop people on the last album. I was like, I'm just going to give them one that they'll really love. You know, maybe that'll kind of bring them into the rest of the album.
Well, I heard a lot of Queen and Mott the Hoople on this album as well.
I'll take that as a big compliment.
Just the way, I haven't quite pinned it down yet. The way the guitars sound and work with the vocals and the harmonies, and the arrangements. Plus, there's also sort of a variety of different sort of styles on it. There are bigger rock songs, and then there are sorry, I'm forgetting the name. Smile.
Oh, Powder Your Face with Sunshine?
Yeah, Powder Your Face with Sunshine, which is more of, that's the lazing on a Sunday afternoon sort of.
But do you know the original or not, the Dean Martin version?
No, I don't.
Oh, it's a great record. It's really, really good. And that I kind of got into because I got asked to do a song on a Cheap Trick tribute record in Australia. Mm-hmm. And they had a bunch of obscure songs. And I was like, oh, that'd be interesting to do. And then at the last minute, he said, "Oh, you know what? The person who was going to do I Want You to Want Me backed out. Do you want to do that one?" And I was like, "That's the matzo ball right there. That's the big one, And I said, "Yeah, I'll do it, And then I was thinking, like, how am I going to? I don't want to do it like, I don't want to do it like Cheap Trick, basically, because they just do such a. I mean, what are you going to do, And then it
was an amazing feeling to sing that line the way that line was sung, if you can do it.
Yeah. So I ended up doing it like kind of a weird Les Paul Mary Ford version with double tracking and like harmonies going like, I want you to want me. And it was just like kind of swing guitar. And then Joe McMahon played bass from Mill Pond Falls. And it was a really weird, like, it was a set of influences I had never used before in my life. I've just never really, I've listened to a lot of that music, but I'd never accessed it in my own thing. I have a regular Sunday morning tradition if I'm all tired from doing a gig. The only thing I really want to listen to is the Mills Brothers. I listen to the Mills Brothers like every Sunday, And so I found this Powder Your Face with Sunshine. I just loved that song for years and years and years and years. And it really plays into what happened with making this album, which I'm sure is your next question.
Yeah, that's in there. I wanted to ask before that, as you're getting ready for this, you had just come off touring with Cardinal.
Yeah,
correct.
Yeah.
So does that influence them being a chamber?
I love Cardinal. That first record is one of the great albums in my mind. And I met Richard doing an interview with him for the Big Takeover magazine, and he's like a very complex character, and I really like him. But he's a loon, He's legally deaf. He wears hearing aids, which you can't even see and you don't even know it. But sometimes he takes them out if he's like doing a sound check and he doesn't want to hear feedback. So a lot of times feedback will just make his head explode, So it's understandable. But he'll take his hearing aids out and then somebody will say something. He'll hear it the wrong way. I'll just get in a fucking total confrontation and you're like, no, that's not even what he said, man. So we did this mad tour, which was a lot of fun for me because the drummer is Malcolm Travis from Sugar. Who's an old friend of mine who I hadn't seen in ages, and I was like, if Malcolm's doing it, I'm in, And it was a very interesting tour because the thing about Cardinal is that, for people who might not know, the whole collaboration with that band is Richard as a songwriter, and then Eric Matthews, who is also a songwriter and a singer, but also did all these arrangements, these string and horn arrangements that are very lush and kind of like Left Bank kind of vibe, And really, I think, in a way, laid a lot of groundwork for some of the sort of orc rock that came after. Not orc but orchestra rock.
Well, with Queen, it could be either.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. But Eric doesn't tour, and they don't really get along that well. I mean, I think there's some reproachment now. But so the idea was that we were going to tour with these orchestrations on a click track that only Malcolm could hear. And I was a little bit... obviously you don't want a train wreck. I appreciated the fact that he wanted to do it the right way with Eric's orchestrations because they are an important part of those sounds. And they had made a new album with the two of them kind of cross-country collaborating.
And did that influence, playing that music, did that influence anything you were writing on this album?
Well, there were strings on the last album too, but I loved what we did, but I kind of wanted to take them to another place. The arranger's a guy named Paul Ostrand who... is a woodwind player, and I literally, on the last album, there were a couple songs where I wanted horns, And I just asked him, Ducky was like, oh, Paul, you know Paul? And I was like, yeah, I know Paul. He's like, oh, he's great. He can put something together. And I didn't even write an arrangement. I figured we'll just have him do kind of, like a real basic horn, whatever. So I sent the tune to Paul, and a couple guys showed up, horn players for one of the songs, and he had written out an arrangement. I was like, oh, thanks, And then there was this really smoking arrangement. And he's like, yeah, that's what I do. I'm like really into arrangements. And I had one song that I wanted to string, so I was like, will you do that? And he did that. And then, so that was kind of like, it just happened. It wasn't really purposeful that we used the arrangements, but they came out really good. There's a song on New Lion Terraces called I Shine, which I wrote for my son, which I'm really proud of. It's something that I don't think I've done anything like that else, throughout my songwriting career. And so Paul really took, I think, there's all sorts of weird like music boxes and stuff and crazy stuff in there. And then on the new record, then I definitely wanted to try like at least a couple songs where I was like, we have to have Paul like now like give him something to really work with, rather than just being something he throws together at the last second because we have a session booked,
Right. So you're in the middle of recording this in January 2016.
Yep.
And you have a stroke.
Big ass stroke.
Yes, I don't know how much you want to say about the stroke or how that felt or what the experience was. What do you want to say about that? The
main thing is that when I had the stroke, of course, I did what anybody would do, which was I Googled stroke recovery musicians and I read everything to the end of the internet and back, and I didn't find anybody who specifically had my situation. There were a couple guys who were close. But I really, as I got better, I really felt strongly that I wanted to lay some digital breadcrumbs down out there for other people who might be going through this to find, who might need it. So I would ask that when you put this podcast up, if you tag it like stroke recovery or something like that. So
certainly.
Here's the thing about the stroke, and I'll talk about it as much as you want, but I was at the gym, I was working out, and just normal workout, maybe pushing myself a little too hard. And I was on a blood pressure medication. I had forgotten to take it that day. Not a high dosage. I didn't think it was a big deal. And I was working out, and I was watching a TV which was to the left, and I was on the elliptical machine. And all of a sudden, I got this weird, like, gray stripe in my right eye, like a vertical gray, almost like a scrim, very narrow, like almost like a gray Band-Aid in my sight. And I thought, that's weird. And I kept trying to rub it away, and nothing would. With my right hand, I kept trying to rub it away, and nothing was working. And then I tried to wipe away some sweat with my left hand, and my fingers and arm felt really like jelly and tingly. So I got off the elliptical machine, and I sat down, and I thought, I just really overdone it a little bit. And I was actually texting with some friends and having some water, And I was joking around, saying, I was on the elliptical machine, and now my hand's numb, just kind of joking around, like, ha, 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 isn't that funny? And my friend was like, if that's true, you better go to the hospital, And I was like, I'm sure I'm fine, But then I went to stand up, and again, I went to wipe sweat off my face, and my hand was still very numb. And I thought, this is pretty weird, and the stripe was still there. So I just went and changed, and I thought, I'm just going to go home and take it easy. And I went to, got out to the car, and I turned my keys, and as I went to turn my turn signal on, I just realized that my hand was just like jelly, and instead of going home, I turned right and went to Somerville Hospital instead. Went to the nearest hospital. And they got me right back as soon as they heard what was going on. Like when I told them my eye and the hand, they got me right back. And I hadn't had a stroke at that point. I was there for a while, called my wife, everything was cool. I was like, you don't have to come get me, I'm sure everything's fine. And they said, they did a bunch of, I think they did an MRI and a CAT scan and a couple other tests, and they said, we think you've had what's called a dissection of the artery. You have a little tiny tear in the lining of your carotid artery in your neck on the right side. And they said, if you've just kind of like, your blood pressure got too high and you just got a little tiny rip, and with a couple of weeks rest, this will probably be okay. We'll put some blood thinners. You'll be okay. You'll recover. It's a close call. And it's a reminder that you have to stay on your blood pressure medication. I was like, okay, good. And then they came back and they said, just to be on the safe side, we want to keep you overnight and observe you. And I was like, okay, And they said, well, we don't have any beds here, so we have to transfer you to Whidden Memorial in Everett. So I was okay. And I had never been in an ambulance before, so I was like, I get to go in an ambulance. It's cool. I was like, seriously, in my late 40s, I've never been in an ambulance before. So I got to go over there, and they wouldn't light the lights up, which was annoying. And they're like, you don't need the lights. So they take me over there, and
It's amazing the things you think of in these crisis.
The lights on.
Everybody else is looking at it as a crisis situation, and you're like, "Hey, oh man."
There's definitely a defense mechanism where like you don't want to take in the possibility of what's going on, you know. So at Whidden in Everett, then we were doing some other tests, and unfortunately, I had moved a little bit when I was in the CAT scan machine originally. They were trying to get a CAT scan or an MRI, a close-up of this carotid artery in the right side of my neck. So we got to do another CAT scan. I was like, okay. And so they take me down there, and the technician puts the IV in, totally empty, just put the line in. As soon as he put it in, I got really nauseous and sweaty. And I said, hey, you know, just so you know, I'm like, I don't feel good. He said, what's going on? I said, I feel nauseous, and my face is hot, and I'm sweaty. He goes, oh, well, maybe you're like a little bit allergic to the contrast dye. I mean, there's no dye in there, but maybe there's like a trace from a previous test. You know, we wash them, but maybe there's just a little bit. And I said, what's going to happen when you put the contrast dye in? He said, well, you're probably going to get sick and throw up, but I just need one picture. So I was like, well, you know, okay. I mean, I can throw up, I guess, you know. So he puts me in the machine, you know, and I'm in there, and he's like, hold still. And meanwhile, I start to like shake. You know, I can't stop shaking. He's like, hold still, hold still. So finally, I'm holding still, and I'm like ready to throw up. He gets me. He said, "I got it." He pulls me out, and at this point, my throat started to swell closed, and I couldn't talk. And he just kind of got me off the table and put me in a wheelchair. And I was trying to say, you know, I'm really sick, but I couldn't. I just couldn't breathe really, and my face was all hot and sweaty. I started to get hives on my forehead. And he took me over to this little side room, and he kind of put me in the corner. He's like, "I'll be back in a few minutes," and he parked me there. And I was really like starting to panic. And luckily, when he left, the door swung up, and my wife saw me in there, and she said I was shaking in the wheelchair, and my face had gotten all swollen up, and there were hives all over my head and my face. My lips swelled up, my eye socket swelled up. So she came running over, and she figured out that I was having a bad reaction and got him. And he came back, and he was like, "Oh, wow." And then he like went into this drawer, and he was fumbling. He was like, "I have an EpiPen here somewhere," but he couldn't find it. So I'm just like, I couldn't breathe or anything. And so finally, he's like, "Wait a minute." He comes back, and he gets some Benadryl and puts it in my IV. And I just went right to sleep. So they wheel me up to my room, and I was kind of like in and out, in and out. And at some point when I was in my room, I realized I had to go to the bathroom, and I said, I have to poop, whatever. And apparently the nurse said, "Okay, hang on, we'll get somebody to help you," but I didn't. Oh no, they said we'll get a bedpan. And at that point, I didn't want that, and I was unconscious basically. I stood up, tried to walk to the bathroom, and I fell. And my wife said, "It was like, no," you know.
Right.
And I fell head first, and I hit my head on the wall of the bathroom. And they pulled me out by my feet, and an orderly was helping me back up into the chair, and that's when I had the stroke. Because I vividly remember like flashing black and white, just like for about, felt like 20 seconds, flashing black and white. And I was trying to say something very bad is happening. I was trying to say very bad, but of course it was just coming out like, "Rrr." And they put me in the bed, got me into bed, cleaned me up and everything. And so then the nurse came in to do like a little neuro check on me, and my face was all slumped down, and I couldn't grasp her hand. And she was like, "Oh, that's weird." And my wife said, "He wasn't like that before." And that's when they got really, I kind of remember seeing the nurse go, like, her eyes got really big, and she was like, "Hang on." And she left, and the doctor came back. And my wife is really funny. She said the doctor was about 14, and she was like all like teary-eyed. And she's like, "We think your husband has had a stroke, and we're going to transfer him." And she was like, the nurse was all freaked out.
I mean, that's another thing people don't realize about this. You may have a great doctor who's trained really well. If they haven't seen what's happening to you right now, they won't know. So it's not necessarily their fault that they didn't recognize it, but if you'd had the guy next to that person, exactly, maybe they would have known.
And then
such a chance.
I know. And then, you know, and in terms of that, as it happened, the place that was available for a bed with me was Beth Israel. They took me right there, so I got another ambulance ride, which I don't remember. But at that point, I was starting to think, like, I think something
that
bad
when they
happened.
turned on the lights.
That when they did, yeah.
Yeah. And
I know, and I didn't even see. But the amazing thing is, at Beth Israel, the neurosurgeon who was on rounds when I was wheeled in was a guy named Dr. Gottfried Schlaug. And this is he's from Cologne, Germany, and his early passion in life was he was a classical pipe organ student, went to a conservatory to study that, and then became a neurologist. But his passion and his field of study for the past 25 years is how musicians and artists recover from traumatic brain injuries. And that's the guy who was on call when I got there. So they were, the nurses were like, "Oh, Dr. Slog, we got a good one for you," So he came in, and I couldn't speak really. I was like, "Arr." And the upshot of it was I had a stroke on the right parietal lobe, and I lost the use of the fingers on my left hand, basically from the second knuckle down. And also I had a paralyzed vocal cord. My face was very droopy. All the nerves on the left side of my face, like my smile lines and everything, weren't working. So my whistle was out the window, and my eye got screwed up. And within, it was pretty dire. I mean, I make a living playing music, so
right.
It was very much a matter of, okay, well, now I think I'm done, And
well, I wanted to ask, how soon was it after this happened that you started thinking about music? Was it as it was sort of happening during the whole thing, or does
no, there were 72 hours where I thought that I was totally done with music, and you're such in the initial state of shock, and people are saying, no, you're just too early, you don't know, it's too early to tell,
right?
And on the third day, then he had a nurse come in, and she's, they do these neuro tests where they basically try to get resistance from different parts of your hand and arm. So like if the nurse held onto my wrist, I could push back. If she held onto the bottom of my hand, I could push back. But once it got to the fingers, it would just fold over, But on the third day, they brought some paper clips in a little cup. She poured them out on the tray. And I guess one of the primate thing is to be able to pinch your index finger and thumb together. And she's like, okay, pick those up and put them in the cup. And it was the hardest thing ever to think of trying to pinch your fingers together, pick up a paper clip, but not be able to do it.
Right.
And, sweating and swearing. And I just couldn't believe that my fingers would not listen to me, And it took 45 minutes, but I was able to eventually get them kind of like up against the cup and kind of like just barely. But I got, 10 paper clips back in like 45 minutes. And Dr. Schlaug came in and he saw me and I was all red-faced and pissed off, He said, look, but you got them in, And I was like, yeah, but I mean, this is ridiculous. And he goes, I don't know. I think you will play music again. Yes, you will definitely play music again. And I was like, oh, good, thanks. He goes, it's going to take incredible hard work, harder than anything you've ever done, but you will play music again. And so then once he said that, I just was determined that this guy knows. And so if there's a possibility, I'm not going to take any excuse to not make this happen. So on the fourth day, he had Darcy bring in like a Casio with light-up keys. He's like, play a scale for me. Play left hand, play a scale. And he sounded like a bear paw, But he had me doing what's called mirror therapy, where like my right hand could play like a little 5-note figure. So you'd like try to match the fingers, and I had to do it super duper slow, and I couldn't do it,
Well, a lot of neurologists won't commit to anything in the future because the brain is such a strange place. They don't know so much. I have MS, and I had my onset was nowhere near as traumatic as yours, but I did have a period of about 3 weeks to a month where I couldn't play guitar. I couldn't form a chord. I would sit down and I would say, all right, I'm just going to make a D chord. And I've made it a billion times before. and I would look at my hand, and then I go, all right, we're going to make a D chord. Yeah. Hey, we're going to make a D chord. And then it just wouldn't, it would fumble around. And I would literally, I remember sitting in my bedroom playing my guitar, grabbing the fingers on my left hand with my right hand and putting them in what should
right
be
shape.
A D chord, and then playing it. And then it just sounded like thunking, like I couldn't get, like the first time you're playing a guitar that the action is way too high and you can't get that down. That passed eventually, but I know that feeling of
it's awful.
Well, what the hell am I going to do now?
It's really awful,
Do I have to quit this? Because I had just sort of, it hadn't been so long at that point where I had decided I'd been in and out of it that I'm going to commit to making this a bigger part. And then all of a sudden there's the idea of, well, this can be taken away from me.
It definitely can. Definitely can. Everything can, And in my particular case, I started doing physical therapy at Spalding Rehab a couple times a week, and I was doing speech therapy at the same time. And in addition to that, I did my own therapy. I read every stroke book on Amazon. I've got 25 stroke books, and
Maybe use a different phrase.
I
was laid up for a while. I couldn't use the internet.
A whole different hand, and it was just a nightmare. That's funny. That's very funny. Stroke recovery books. There's a neurologist in Toronto named Dr. Norman Doidge, and I have to say I found his books to be the most inspiring, just on the possibility of what your brain can do, and it's incredible. Now, basically, I wouldn't want to dishonor him by trying to oversimplify what his books talk about, so I'd recommend reading those if anybody's facing that. But I started doing 5 or 6 hours a day of very, very slow, basic things on bass, not guitar, because it was just a little bit easier for me to hold those strings down, and keyboard, just trying to do little 5-note scales. But I'm talking the tempo would be like with a metronome,
right?
And trying to just get in time with that, and increase it 1 click every day. And I would do it 5 or 6 hours every day. And I'm really lucky in that the guys who I'm business partners with, I would go to work. After a few weeks, I was able to go back to work. They cleared me to drive, and I was able to go back to work and work until like maybe noon or 1, come home and take a nap because you're just exhausted all the time, and then get Harrison from school and then just do my exercises all night long, and after about maybe 5 or 6 weeks, I was able to play. One of the things that that Dr. Doidge talked about, and Dr. Schlaug also, was to try to do things that you're familiar with musically, because your brain is going to want to reach out and play those patterns that you know. So I went back to playing songs that when I first started playing bass, they were the songs that I learned. And funnily enough, like when I was first handed a bass in my little teenage band, what I learned to play bass to was Zenyatta Mandata by the Police. I just played along to that album constantly. So that's what I did, and I couldn't keep up with the tunes at all at first, but I would play like, The World Was Running Down, and another big one was, and because I was trying to work on stretches, what I lost on the left hand in particular was my sense of spatial relationships. Like my fingers no longer knew that this amount of space was a half step higher and this is an octave, so I lost that. I was trying to retrain that, so I was working on some stretches, so I started playing Green Eyed Lady by Sugarloaf over and over. That was a big one for me. So this took like 5 months before I could really kind of play anything again. Now, at the same time, my business is with this, this soul band playing guitar. And as I got back to being able to play guitar a little bit, I started going to some of the gigs and just kind of being there because that's my job. And then sometimes I would have another guitar player and I would try to play a couple songs and then let them take over. But what I kind of instinctively found is that being on a stage, when a drummer clicks their sticks together 4 times, my brain wants to do something. My brain sends a signal to my hand to do something, And I think that was a big part of my recovery, is getting in a live music environment way before I was ready to actually do anything, and just hearing those sticks click together and hearing a song start, and I could feel like my brain reaching out to my fingers trying to forge new paths,
Well, when I went through physical therapy after my first couple attacks, the therapist said the best thing you can do is pick up your guitar again and sit behind your drum kit again. That's the best thing you can do for your hands and your coordination. And how did you
discover that you have MS?
It was sort of a long process. I had the first attack they thought was shingles, because it started behind my neck and wrapped over my shoulder and down my sternum. It was numb and hot and itchy at the same time. So I went in and saw the nurse practitioner, and they thought it might be shingles, so they were keeping an eye on that. And then the numbness went down into my right hand. It kept traveling around my body. It went down to my right hand, and then my right hand was fine again, and then it went to my left arm, and then it went to my left hand. It sort of traveled from the top down. It went down to my middle, which led to a very embarrassing ER trip. At that point, Survival of the Dead was at Cinema Salem, and it wasn't going to be. But it was only in town for 1 week. It wasn't going to play anywhere, so I had my middle went numb in the middle of that movie, and I thought, I'm just gonna tough this out and go to the ER afterwards because I want to see this
made it to
movie.
the end of the movie?
It's a new Romero zombie movie.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna, all right, if something happens. But then I went to the ER, and they did their test. They had me in just the little Johnny in the ER, and the doctor comes in and opens the curtain, and I'm sitting there with my butt facing the everybody in the place. He walks in and doesn't pull the curtain back.
Thank you.
Excuse me, could you pull that back? 'Cause I'm and he looked at me and sighed. Like, fine, and went back and then did his visit. So we still hadn't quite figured it out. It took months of that happening, and finally went down to my legs and my feet, and that's when I had to go to physical therapy to sort of keep walking normally, and then finally I saw they did a spinal tap, and it said it looks like this is MS. Because it could, there are a million things it could be. It could be with neurological disorders. This could be lupus. It could be anything. So then they finally I got in a couple more MRIs, and they looked at my spine and saw there were lesions on the spine.
Oh wow!
I said that's indicative of MS. So we're gonna start treating you for MS. It was a long process, but there was a point where once they finally identified it, I said, all right, well, now we can figure out how to beat this. We can figure out where to go. And I'm assuming you had that moment when the neurologist told you you're going to play music again.
But it was so early on.
He had an idea that you could.
Very early on. And I was in the hospital for 6 days, and that was like the third or fourth day when he said that. And I was very tentatively optimistic because it just seemed impossible. But,
did you know people had recovered from strokes before? Did you know any?
What's funny is that my last show before I had a stroke was opening up for Dave Davies at the Kinks at the Wilbur. And I'm a huge Kinks fan, and it was very, very cool. But he had a stroke about 10 years ago, which I knew. And I kind of noticed that he had a stroke that disabled his right hand, and I noticed that like when he would do like he had his action kind of low and the gain kind of high, so it was like his left hand was kind of doing most of the work there. You know? But he put on a great show, and I kind of tweeted to him a private message, like, "Hey man, I caught your stroke." Thanks, But he was like, just he kind of sent me some message, just stay calm and give yourself time to recover, and trust in he's a very spiritual guy, trust in the universe and all that, but like just the fact that I had seen somebody who had a stroke was back on stage playing guitar, I was like, well, it can be done. And I did understand that every stroke is different and they're all different degrees, And then the other thing is I felt devastated completely with my first, I thought I am just wrecked as a human being. This is terrible, But then the first time I went to Spalding, you see guys who were 15, 16 months outside of a stroke, still trying to walk, and you're like, oh my God, I'm in great shape. I'm doing great, I'm like a real asshole for feeling bad about it.
Sorry, sorry for you, buddy, but
hey, I felt like I was like, who am I to complain? I'm a real dick.
Right.
I can still walk. I don't forget any words,
Yeah, I have that. I see people who got MS 10 years ago before the treatment. The treatments are so much better now.
Yeah.
And there are people who can't walk, who have a lot more trouble in day to day. Fatigue is my biggest thing.
Yeah.
And every once in a while, I've had one recurring numbness. So, I feel I could be luckier to not have it at all, but I'm fortunate in that it happened to me when it did, and that it's not as advanced as it is in a lot of other people I know.
In a lot of ways, the hardest thing for me was the singing, because I really love to sing, and
Are you back to exactly where you were before?
5 gigs in the last 4 days, and 4 of them were 4 hours long.
Wow.
So, I'm doing great. There are little things that I notice, but I worked so hard on my voice, and it was a paralyzed vocal cord. I could get no vocal closure, like chord closure. So,
so you can hear the conversation cut out there. Here's the second part, which was done by phone. I feel like there's one sort of extra question today that we might not have had yesterday that I feel I want to add at the beginning of this. I don't know if Tom Petty was an influence on you or somebody you'd want to talk about, but obviously his loss is huge.
Oh yeah, I mean I'm really just sad. I've been really, really sad about Tom Petty all day. I've been thinking about it all day, which is, on top of the sadness of the Las Vegas shooting. I mean, it's just like that was like a double whammy yesterday. And with the Tom Petty thing, I just think that any songwriter would have to really respect Tom Petty. That's a guy who, through such a long career and so many hits, managed to sort of never lose track of where he came from. His roots were evident in everything he did, but at the same time, he sounded fresh on just about everything he did. There's very little in his catalog that felt like a retread. And he had a real sort of knack for making things sound simple, which is like the hardest thing to do if you're a songwriter.
Right.
You're going to work with a limited vocabulary of chords. Very, very tricky. Takes a lot of skill to pull that off.
Yeah, it was somebody.
Nothing but the highest respect for Tom Petty.
Somebody just posted that, and my thoughts were, try to sing "Here Comes My Girl" and really sell it.
Yeah, that talking bit. I mean, it takes somebody, and he was so young when he did that too.
Yeah, and it sounds like it should be. Hey, he's kind of talk singing. I should just be able to toss this out, and it's really hard to do.
Yeah, and his singing voice, I think, is really fantastic. I'm quite certain it's very unique, and I bet when he was first starting out in cover bands, people didn't like him because he didn't sound like somebody else. So of course he sounds a bit like Dylan, he sounds a bit like Roger McGuinn, but I bet he was discouraged from being the lead singer when he was young because of the uniqueness of his voice. And a Tom Petty record, he has such a skill for making an opening line on a single where you immediately are like, that's a Tom Petty song, and I'm in.
Yeah. So where the recording went wrong, you were talking about your doctor at Mass Eye and Ear and your vocal coach and the things you were doing to get your voice back.
So I lost the use of my fingers on my left hand, and I had a paralyzed vocal cord, so I had no vocal cord closure, which is what it sounds like I have today, but really I just have a little bit of a cold. So my vocal cords are not closing completely at all. There's one side that was overreaching to try to connect, and it just wasn't happening. And it was very hard to tell at first because my voice is always, I have a raspy voice. So at first, I thought it was like, oh, no, I'm fine. It's just the way it sounds. But really, between that and the slur that was going on with the drooping of my mouth and the muscles around my mouth, it was really hard to tell at first the damage that was there. So I had to very slowly attack this from a couple different angles. And over time, I think that my advice to anybody with an injury like this is to attack it from a bunch of different angles, to try everything and see if sort of cumulatively they make a difference. So, I mean, the first thing that happened is that, I ordered every stroke recovery book on Amazon. I just emptied Amazon on stroke recovery books, read them all. I started traditional therapy at Spalding Rehab, which is an amazing place. And, essentially, you could be feeling really just like at the end of your rope and the first day you're at Spalding Rehab and you look around and see the people who are working through injuries much worse than yours and have been for a much longer time. There just is you have no ability to feel bad for yourself anymore. You're just like, you have to get down to work and just do it, You see people who are like 15, 16 months out of a stroke and they're still working on learning to walk with balance. And you can't help but think, well, I mean, I guess still okay. I kind of had a bit of a lucky stroke here. I didn't lose the ability to walk, or I didn't forget words. Aphasia didn't hit me that hard, So I did a lot of therapy there. That was with my hand. And it was very, very simple, repetitive exercises. I also did speech therapy there, trying to get rid of the slur in my voice. And then about maybe 5-6 weeks through that, into the speech therapy, we decided to try specifically vocal therapy. So I went to Mass Eye and Ear and worked with a guy named Dr. Philip Song. strangely enough, who is a great vocal therapist, and he helped me work through some traditional vocal therapy there. Now, in addition to that, I was trying a lot of different less traditional approaches.
Mm-hmm.
There's a book by a Canadian doctor, Dr. Norman Doidge, How to Fix Your Broken Mind, I think it's called.
Uh-huh.
He has a couple books, and they're about traumatic brain injury. And he brought up a lot of different angles and interesting things to try. And I tried, some of them are like diet-based, and some of them, some are a little bit artsy-fartsy, all sorts of things. But there were some common themes running through a lot of them, which was basically, the idea is you're trying to get this neuroplasticity going with your brain and getting your brain to, your brain is sending signals like it would normally would. It's just trying to reconnect with your nerves and your synapses. So anything you can do to kind of get those signals to send and try to cause an automatic reaction to help, that's what you're looking for. So for instance, in the case of, I lost my smile for a long time, which is, in my life, my smile has allowed me to really get away with a lot of stuff I've said over the years.
Right.
Little smart-ass things I've said over the years. My smile has been the thing that kept me from getting punched in the nose. So I was really hoping to get that back. And so for instance, one of the things we tried, which is not like a guaranteed thing, we just tried, is I taped my face into place when it was kinesio tape, with the idea being that when I would try to smile, my muscles were in the place where they were supposed to be, the nerves were in the right spot, it might make the pathway easier. And it was very awkward walking around with kinesio tape on my face for 4 months, but it certainly didn't hurt. It might have helped. I don't know.
Well, one of the things they told me in physical therapy for MS is that there are sort of redundant pathways and processes in the body that maybe the thing that used to help you do one thing before is gone, but something else can help you, with relearn your grip or.
It makes sense. It makes sense a lot, Now, on a musical standpoint, I went back to like my very beginnings as a player. After a few weeks, I regained enough strength in my hand through exercises that I could hold down a note on my bass. But what I lost touch with, what I lost sense of completely, and this is a very hard thing for somebody to understand who has undergone a brain injury, I lost my knowledge or my instinct for how movement on an instrument on a string works. Like my fingers no longer knew that if I was holding down a note that just a little bit to the right was a half step higher, or a little bit to the left was a half step lower. My fingers didn't know what an octave was anymore, or a third, or a fifth, or any intervals. So I had to relearn those things physically. My brain still knew, but my fingers didn't understand those signals. So I went back to playing bass, and I went back to when I was first starting to play bass. When I was 13 or 14 years old, and what I did was I just played along to Zenyatta Mandata by the Police, because that was the album I learned to play bass to. And obviously there's some Beatles things in there, but I went back to that specific moment in time, and I just played along really slowly the bass lines to Zenyatta Mandata. Then I would try to play them on time with the record, couldn't keep up, I would fall behind and get frustrated. I was working for several hours a night, every night, and I would try to do things like scales and arpeggios and very, very slow metronome settings. Again, very, very frustrating because my fingers did not know how to play a scale anymore. My brain still knew, but my fingers couldn't do it. So I just did that for months and months and months. Now, the voice thing was very frustrating because I'm just so used to being able to sing, having done it for so long. I had to really kind of start from scratch for that and relearn intervals. I couldn't do intervals anymore, so I had to relearn physically what the distance of a half step or a third was, and that was very frustrating too. But it took months and months and months and months, but I just kept doing it for hours every night, and I thought that it was important to go out and see people play. I used to go to sleep at night just picturing chord shapes in my head. I just had this theory that my brain would keep working on it, and I think that helped too,
Right, and then you got out to see more music and see how people were doing it. That was one of the things you mentioned that you wanted to get.
I said to my wife at a certain point, I just feel like I should go watch some people play guitar. So I went to a couple shows. I went to see Gaz Coombs from Supergrass's acoustic show, and I went to see that. and I went to see Elvis Costello and a couple other shows just to get. And I went to see Scott Janos was playing at Toad, and I went to watch his fingers, you know.
Uh-huh.
And I just felt like that would make a difference, and I think it did, you know.
And how long was it before you started thinking, I'm in the middle of an album here, I've got to get back to doing that?
Well, another big part of it was that I just really wanted to be around music, and particularly the recording process. So, luckily, the guy who mixes all my music and a good friend of mine, Ducky Caroline, just drove to Ducky's house, and he was mixing something, and I just sat on his futon and listened to him mix for a while. You know, it lasted about a half an hour, then I came home. And I just started going there and hanging out, listening, and just kind of, he was very sympathetic to my situation and encouraging. And we started, like, opening up some of my old files of songs I'd been working on and, like, kind of rearranging things and putting them in templates. And we kept speaking about, well, when you can sing again, this is what you'll do. And we mapped out how the backgrounds would go and where the lead vocals would be. On some songs that I didn't have lyrics yet for, but we just kept saying, when you could sing again. And that was kind of a goal that I was working towards, being able to do some vocals. And then, I guess about 6 months in, I was able to finish up a lead vocal on a song. And it was really, you know, it was very nerve-wracking because when I got in the little vocal booth, I wasn't sure I was going to be able to actually do it. And at first, it just didn't sound that good, but we worked our way through it, and I finished it. I was all red-faced and sweaty by the time I came out of the vocal booth. But when I came out, Ducky was kind of sniffling and wiping tears out of his eyes, so it really meant a lot to be able to get back to doing that, you know?
Well, how did you feel with getting that first vocal done?
It was very emotional. It was like I saw a little bit of a path there. And still I had very much of a slur with my lip, and I kind of could hear that in the vocal, but I thought, well, let's leave that. That's real, you know?
Now, and that's when you booked the date at Ardent as well, right? Shortly after that?
Yeah. And that was another thing where as I was kind of coming back as part of my recovery, I was doing better, and I started going to some of the private events, weddings and stuff that my corporate band was booked on. Sometimes there'd be another guitar player there, and I would just go and just kind of be there to say hi to the client and like get things started, and then I would have to take off. But eventually I got to the point where I felt strong enough to get on stage with a guitar around my neck, and I did have like this instinct that if I heard a drummer click 4 sticks together and the band started kicking in, that my brain would like definitely want to reconnect and do what it's supposed to do. And it actually worked out pretty well. It kind of like I felt like that was a big jump forward with when I just felt like hearing a drummer click the sticks together. It really made my brain just reach out to those fingertips and do something now, you know, because it always has, you know. So as we were going along, my friend Rob Anastasi asked if I would go to Memphis and play bass on a session for him at Ardent with Jody Stevens on drums, which of course I wanted to do so much, and I really, you know, I had to be honest with him and say, look, I'm not totally sure that I'm 100% back, but I would be happy to go give it a try. And, you know, he sent me the songs, and it felt like it'd be worth doing, that I wasn't going to blow it or anything like that. So we got to go down there. I recorded 3 of his songs, and then I was feeling pretty confident, so I booked a session the next day, and we left the drum mics up, and I was able to record stuff with Jody for my album. I finished up a song that I had kind of partially written. It was very much about where I was feeling about my stroke experience, and it's called Magpie Over Citadel. And so that was kind of very rewarding, and also, you know, just very thankful that Rob felt confident enough to take a chance on me there, you know?
Well, all these little things building confidence to get back to feeling like yourself again. How long did it take for you to feel like yourself again? I
would say to really feel 100% or 95% or whatever I'm at was about a year. The thing that was very tough emotionally was that even once I got my fingering mostly back, there are still a couple things I can't do. I particularly have problems with pull-offs and hammer-ons, although they're getting better. I worked around them, but I just couldn't do pull-offs for a long time. I just didn't have the sensibility to do it. The singing thing came back to the point where I was feeling pretty good about that, but even then, 10 months out, 11 months out, I still didn't have my smile fully back. It was still just drooping, and, I grew a mustache, and it just looked like this very unlucky 7 horizontally on my face, And then I thought, well, this is it. This is the way it's going to be forever. And then it improved just a little bit more around last year. I started noticing it was just like a little bit better. And then about a year out, I was like, I think I can smile at a picture that doesn't look, doesn't look like a horrifying thing, And it's still a little droopy. If I get extra tired or extra emotional, my side of my face looks droopy. But I've just kind of accepted that part of what my face looks like now,
When did you record Wind Up Boy with Tanya Donnelly?
That was one of the early ones that I started on the album. That was a real thrill for me artistically to get to work with Tanya on that. I think she's just fantastic, and she really added exactly what that song needs. And I think that's the song that should be featured on AAA radio right now all over the world. Beyond me.
And when we spoke before, you mentioned you there were a batch of songs that you wrote before, a batch of songs you wrote after, and you really didn't want this to be a woe is me kind of record.
Yeah. I mean, I really was feeling. Part of me wanted to document some of the weird medical things of the stroke. Like obviously, the second song has the MRI sounds in it, and specifically is about some of the hospital experience of the stroke. And to me, that was kind of important to document some of the actual details of the hospital part of it, the medical part of it. I was okay with that being part of the album, but I didn't want the whole album to be about like a pity party for me,
Right, and you didn't want necessarily people to be able to identify which songs were about the particular experience. Was that
exactly? But I will say that the first song I recorded was Little Crumbles, and then that became like the theme. I already had that done when the stroke happened, and then like sort of the metaphor of the how the cookie crumbles and Broken Biscuits became very much a theme throughout the album. Then, but it was that actual I Met a Man at the Broken Biscuit counter was a year and a half done by the time I had the stroke.
Now, is there more?
Out that way.
Is there more urgency now for you, knowing that this is something that could be taken away from you?
Well, it's an interesting combination of what I would say is that I love and cherish playing more than I ever have in my whole life, and I really, when I say I'm happy to be here on stage, I mean it from the bottom of my heart, especially when I'm playing original shows. It really just means a ton to me because I get to play bass, And I really, I just cherish the fact that I've been able to find my way back to do this again, I had to decide whether I really wanted it enough to fight hard enough to get back to do it now that I have. I'm thankful that I was able to, The other side of that is I'm not desperately ambitious to, I don't know how to express it except to say that I just have to kind of take my time with things and do what I feel comfortable with and what feels right, and not say yes to every gig.
Right.
Because I just would burn myself out, I just need to really go into things feeling strong and ready.
So where does that leave you? What's next? Where do you go from here?
This is a complex question because I still have a lot of things I want to say and write musically, but the act of putting together a record and everything that goes into it, all the small, non-fun, non-musical aspects of it, I'm not so overly driven to do those things, whether it's, dealing with getting physical copies made, and who knows, maybe physical copies don't even need to be anything anymore, but dealing with things like publishing and ASCAP registration and all that stuff, the business, I just kind of feel like, who cares? Who wants to be
right.
A bunch of work to get, 3 cents in the mail, So I'm much less ambitious about things like that, and I also realize that there are younger people out there with new bands who's dying to make records and get them out there, and I don't want to take up the space that might go to them. But I also feel like I have a lot of things I want to say, so it's a conflict, And part of me is just like, okay, well, I said what I wanted to say, maybe I should just back off and just take it easy, but I don't know if I even know how to do that, If you're of the sort of mindset of being a songwriter, that's just the way you think all the time. You always think in terms of songs, so what would you do if you just stopped being that? What would you do with all this thoughts and all that energy? I don't know how you do that.
Well, it'd probably physically hurt. It's like it's all building up.
It's just a writing down things all the time. So what am I doing that for? You know, so
right.
I don't know. You know.
Well, and what would you say, just in parting here, to someone who's going through what you were going through a year and a half ago, or the loved ones of people who are going through this?
Well, I think that there's a natural amount of despair that comes with a situation like that. And it's no good to say to anybody, like, okay, you know, chin up, you're going to have to just work hard and get over it. You have to deal with that despair and the depression that something like this causes.
Mm-hmm.
It's major, and it can really make you feel like giving up. But you have to find a way to deal with the actual sorrow that you're feeling and work hard, because time is of the essence. You don't have time to feel bad for yourself, but you have to go through that. Excuse me. You have to go through that, but you also have to get into the rehabilitation process early and stay at it. And as discouraging as it can be, and at times when it feels like you're making no progress at all, the important thing is you have to do it every single day.
Mm-hmm.
No days off in stroke recovery. You're going to get exhausted. You're going to need naps. You're going to get very down on yourself and your progress. You have to just keep at it no matter what. So that's your job to do that, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I again would encourage that Norman Doidge book. I highly recommend. And I think that it's important to approach stroke recovery from as many angles as you can, and just try all sorts of different things. You know, approach it from different angles and different perspectives, and try to find how you can make that neuroplasticity happen and reconnect to the synapses, because your brain is desperately trying to reconnect. You just have to find ways to help it.
What was the spelling of that author's last name for the book?
It's Doidge.
Okay.
And, The Brain's Way of Healing. That's the name of the book.
Okay.
And he has 2 books, but it's just a fascinating book. He takes you onto all sorts of different disciplines, that are not specifically stroke, but brain healing.
Right. And where can people look to find your stuff? What's the best?
Well, my website's corinashley.com, and there are a lot of videos and links over there, but it's on Spotify. And you can find it on YouTube and your favorite file sharing service, I'm sure. And iTunes, and it's available. You can buy it on vinyl at Newbury Comics, or through the website or anything like that. But there's a lot of music out there.
So please, people, go and get the album and get that 3 cents a song.
Yeah, that's right. I need that.
Yes. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time again, and I apologize again for having to come back.
No worries. It's just very enjoyable talking to you.
Yes, yeah, I appreciate it, and thanks for being so open about
thanks. You're welcome.
An arrow to the head isn't always a trick.
Thanks again to Corin Ashley for taking the time to speak, and for his patience in the second phone call. You can find his work on iTunes and on his website, corinashley.com. Please pick up Broken Biscuits and give it a spin. Wrapping up, we have Twitter insults from Fern Brady's new album, Female Comedian. You can find her on Twitter, and if you happen to be listening in the UK, she's got a string of dates lined up on her Facebook page. And now, Fern Brady.
But I had this feeling that I didn't really fit in with other women, because you get people that talk about gender as if it's innate and go, all women are like this, all men are like this. It's the same sorts of people that like stag and hen do's, right? And I don't know what they're talking about. And I got to a point where I thought, maybe that means I'm actually a guy inside. And I said to my boyfriend, look, how would you feel about you and me staying together, but we just live as a couple of gay lads, right? And he said, Fern, it's coming out with statements like this. That's why you can't ever come back to my parents for Christmas dinner. But I'd been getting really sort of worked up about not fitting in with girls. And then I started to do better in comedy, and that kind of filled the emptiness within, gave me some validation, started getting to go on the telly more and more. But actually, that's not as good as I imagined it, because the first time I got to go on telly, while the programme was being broadcast, I got texts from my friends saying, have you seen what people are saying about your face on Twitter? Right? And I was like, no, but it's probably some sexist stuff about me being too good looking to concentrate on the jokes. It wasn't. Someone tweeted a picture of my large moon-like face on their TV screen, and they wrote underneath, "This woman genuinely has the farthest apart eyes I have ever seen on another human being." Hashtag eyes far apart. Now, I never knew that this was a problem with my face, right? I'd been living my whole life up to this point totally unaware that I look like a hammerhead shark, right? Even now, I don't know if people are laughing going, "Don't be silly, your face is normal," or "Fuck me, she does look like one of those sharks." But there's nothing I can do to change that aspect of my face. There's no plastic surgery that exists or a diet I can go on that will move this eye closer to that eye. Those operations don't exist. I checked online when I was looking up massive hand reduction surgery. All I can do now is walk around covering my hideous face with my gigantic hands so I don't offend the men of Twitter. So I was crying when this happened, and I go to get a tissue, but I can't find a tissue wide enough to dab at my horrible far apart eyes. And I just have to let the tears form two separate puddles on the ground. Like a big sad pug. And then I text my dad, because I naively thought parents give good advice in times of crisis. "Dad, just went on telly for the first time. Everyone's saying I've got far apart eyes." And a guy had made a meme out of it. And I don't have children, but I think a normal parent's advice would be along the lines of, "Don't worry, people on the internet are bullies and trolls. Looks don't count." Or even, "Your eyes aren't that far apart." On your face. All good answers. This is what my dad texts back to comfort me. "I went to the opticians this week. He said I've got the widest space between the eyes he's ever measured." Right. So in Dad's mind, we're in some sort of warped competition as to which of us is the ugliest.
Dear Young,